talk about what you do, Miss Donna, with your body wisdom. Tell us about that.
Well, I started out as a yoga teacher in 1981. And I very quickly learned for myself what the New York Times actually reported on this weekend in their magazine section, which is that a lot of people get strains and injuries from doing yoga. And as much as I really perceive quite an amazing health benefit from yoga, particularly in terms of relaxation, I also didn't want to put people at risk for hurting themselves.
With yoga?
With yoga.
That's surprising, because usually
would you say more the advanced yoga, or even the
I would say it depends on the teacher,
okay,
the method, and also your orientation within yourself. Because I think a lot of injury comes not just from yoga, but from the gym, from aerobics, from all sorts of stuff, because we only feel like we're really doing something if we push ourselves really far.
That's true, especially women.
Yeah.
Especially women.
And there's a bodily expression of pushing yourself far. So when I began my sort of inquiry into how to teach movement-infused yoga, a kind of yoga that could still be done, but was done with a gentleness and an integrity. And when I say integrity, I mean done in a way that makes sense to how our bodies want to move. Naturally. So how do we unlock that? And one of the people I encountered was a man who's no longer alive, but his name was Thomas Hanna. And I did a bit of study with him. And he talked about the red light reflex and the green light reflex. And the red light reflex is something that happens in our bodies when we want to accomplish. And it involves throwing ourselves forward in space. Now, I'm exaggerating it here, but it can actually be a very subtle movement. And it's reinforced in a lot of yoga classes, because a lot of yoga classes are about lifting and expanding and bringing yourself out, even if they're beginning classes. So if you couple that instruction with someone who's already in a kind of chronically stressed red light reflex, you are already pushing someone beyond where their body should be pushed, even if it's the gentlest, most beginning of yoga classes.
So when you see that person, you actually probably sit and talk with them first, see what kind of lifestyle, their health, how their health is,
a lot
age.
of people who come to my classes are people who have already had injuries, not just from yoga, although a lot from yoga, but from other things. People who are ill and don't have the stamina for a normal yoga class. And I also find myself working with people who have a certain amount of nervous system distress. They're aware that they're too amped up. And even just taking time out for relaxation doesn't help them enough. It's almost like they're in a cycle of being really amped up and then relaxing because they're exhausted. And
a lot of women are like that.
A lot of women are like that. And you were talking about menopause earlier, and I think it shows up more, too, when women get perimenopausal and then through the beginning of menopause.
So is this a series of movement that you take a person through?
I work with re-educating movement, and then when the movement is changed, then we can advance into some yoga poses. So for instance, you might have a person who, when they walk, they don't put their first weight on the heel of their foot. So they put their first weight on their full foot. And then they're picking up their feet too, and using the muscles of their upper leg rather than getting a full extended gait. Now that lack of a proper gait is going to give them even more trouble with the hamstring stretches in yoga. And stretching the hamstrings isn't going to change the habit of their gait. So a person like that will get into a big struggle with themselves, like, I'm stretching my hamstrings, I'm working really hard, why are they still so tight? And if they never look at changing the way they walk, well, that's what they're doing most of the day.
So you're going to take a person, basically, look at them and give them some wisdom about how to walk, how to move. That's what basically this is about?
Absolutely. And because we're also doing it in a very a way that focuses on balancing the nervous system so that they're not in a chronic achievement crash kind of place. When the nervous system gets more evened out, people also discover for themselves how best to be in their bodies and exercise their bodies. And specifically for yoga, that people start to understand, do I go into this pose, and if I do go into this pose, how far do I take it for me? Not because the teacher's telling me to, not because I'm seeing it in a magazine, but what is the wisdom of my own body.
Now, what about men
me?
compared to women? Do they, in other words, do they have to walk heel first?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's.
But they seem to carry themselves so differently than women.
There are definitely.
We don't want them like models on a
anatomical.
runway walking.
Well, I think she's talking about how to walk, period. How to,
Yeah,
I know.
I mean, there are differences. Like women have wider pelvises, so our hips
Yeah.
are going to swing more than men's hips are going
you're
to swing.
saying
Men's
general,
center of
everybody should-
gravity is a little
Right, right.
higher than ours, so there's more of like a chest focus.
being
in men.
aware of our
Right.
body,
But
how we're moving.
The
and-
foundation of how we move as human beings
Right.
is the same.
So you start off with that.
Yeah.
So are there exercises that you give the individual to
I
work on?
give explorations, yeah, and in the next segment we can look at a little bit of a very simple exploration I might give, and it's subtle, and that's the thing. It's very much about initially an undoing rather than a doing more, and that tends to be good for everyone's nervous system too, because I haven't met that many people who are just kind of content yet energized. And that's the hallmark of a happy nervous system, you
I'll
know?
be honest with you. I'm like having a hard time visualizing the whole thing.
I know, being content but yet energized.
I
Exactly.
know.
Yeah.
You're going to have to show us a few
Yeah.
things so I can
Yeah.
kind of really understand what you're saying.
know.
It's a whole mindset, a whole different way of thinking, and maybe even while you're moving, actually knowing how am I moving? Is that
It's
rethinking?
retraining,
everything that
retraining
you do,
yourself.
And
how to do it.
sometimes it's also, you know, you were talking about aging in the first segment, and another thing that happens to men and women when we age, and maybe, I don't know, maybe women especially, but our brains aren't as flexible, and there's a lot of advice about, you know, doing crossword puzzles, learning foreign languages, whatever you
Yes,
can
I
to
figured
create
that.
kind of mental gymnastics. And part of creating mental gymnastics is maybe doing things differently in your body. I can show you a little bit about that. I just thought of another
Oh, good.
exercise that I'd like to do that. Actually, I have worked with the elderly quite a bit too, and you know, people will come and they'll say like, well, I have to stretch out my shoulders because I can't really look behind me when I'm pulling the car out of the driveway, which is of great concern
Right.
for a person who's older and aging. And so they're trying to stretch, and they stretch, and they're getting a little benefit, but it's not quite cutting the grade, or their shoulders are in such a weird position from years of tension, it might actually even be dangerous for them to stretch out in a kind of classical yoga way. So I can show you something that I would do with a person like that would help them actually repattern a way their shoulder is in their body. And
You
then allow
look
for a
very
stretch.
relaxed. You sit
good.
and you don't look like you're stressed just sitting
No.
there. Do you have exercises that you give a person in terms of breathing to be relaxed, or what would you do in a situation where a person is really stressed?
Well, I would say that the first thing I do with breathing also is help them uncover the natural breath. So again, if your breath's very restricted and tight, you could try it right now. Like hold your breath and then try to breathe in deep. And you can feel how that becomes a struggle. But say you just start taking your hands up and down, kind of in an easy flow. Like, don't rush yourself. See, this is how people get in trouble a lot everywhere, is not finding your own rhythm.
Oh,
So
okay.
see how easily you could bring your hands up and how easily you could bring them down, and notice that your breathing
Oh, you look
becomes
relaxed.
more natural and
Yes.
deep just
I'm paying
by
attention.
you're paying attention and you're feeling your own flow. You're not thinking about how fast your hands should be
Right.
going, or how your breath should coordinate with your hands. So it's actually, like I said, it's undoing. It's very simple awareness.
Awareness. Well, please stay